Thank you so much for joining us this evening on Promise in Me Unleashed. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And what a time to really talk about breast cancer. But this year, we're going to talk about breast cancer as it relates to research and women's health. Today, we have with us our guest, Dr. Avonne Connor. I'm just going to read a snippet of her bio. She's going to share a little bit more with us as we talk today about breast cancer and women's health. So Dr. Connor is a cancer epidemiologist focused on breast cancer in women and cancer health disparities research with a background in both basic and public health sciences and an expertise in conducting population-based research. She is currently an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and with a joint appointment in oncology at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and the Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center. She also serves as the director of the Cancer Epidemiology Track Division in the Department of Epidemiology at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. With a focus on modifiable lifestyle factors, biological factors, and social inequities, Dr. Connor conducts research that identifies women at risk of breast cancer and poor health outcomes after breast cancer, identifying or utilizing different epidemiology methods and well-established population-based data sources. Now, I just said a whole lot. I just said a whole lot, and I'm not going to fumble anymore because I know Dr. Connor is here to really share with us what she does, the impact that it is having, and what she would like to see in the future as it relates to women's health and breast cancer research. So Dr. Connor, I'd like to welcome you to Promise in Me Unleashed.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline. It's a pleasure to join you and your viewers this evening. And I just wanted to give a little background. You've used the words population-based, and I just wanted to give some clarity to that because we're aware of clinical research, right? Where your doctor or a nurse might see you in a clinic and ask you to change some behaviors or actually give you medications to see if that medication impacts your health outcome. So we could call that sometimes a clinical trial. So the type of research I do is population-based, meaning we find women in my particular research area, which are women, or different study participants who are actually in the community, or they might go to a certain clinic or hospital, but we're not targeting them while they're at their appointments. It's like you're just someone in the community who might be interested in participating in some type of study. That's my research is more focused on lifestyles and what information we can get from you in particular. So if you're filling out a survey telling us about things you might eat in your diet, how often you exercise, where you live in your community, and the type of health conditions you might deal with. Those type of interviews or surveys are the type of data that I collect. And then I use that data to draw conclusions about the population of people who I'm interested in researching. So for my area, and particularly right now, it's Black women who have had breast cancer or breast cancer survivors. And a lot of them are actually from the state of Maryland. So I have a local or statewide focus in my research currently. And that's the difference between where I would say clinical research, where you might be taking some medication or changing some type of clinical outcome. But for me, it's about things that can be modified on your own or following over time to see if you change if you make this modification in your diet or you make some changes in your lifestyle, how does that impact your health overall after your cancer diagnosis? So that's where we get more into the population-based versus I'm doing clinical research. I'm in a hospital. I'm a trained physician. I'm actually a trained epidemiologist. And so that's where that word comes in. We think about epidemics and populations. So epidemiology is that source of, or that field in that area of population research.
Awesome, awesome. And I'm glad that you defined that for us. One other thing, term that comes up a lot is comorbidity. Let's talk about that for just a few minutes.
Yes. So comorbidities are co, co, like morbid, meaning like your health conditions, right? So if you are a survivor, breast cancer survivor, one thing I'm particularly interested in are, or things I'm interested in are what health outcomes you have in addition to having your cancer diagnosis. So having a cancer diagnosis is one chronic condition that you're facing that you either overcome through having your treatments and you're far out from your diagnosis, or you might still be dealing with different side effects from that, or you might have a recurrence and have to go through medications again and radiation. And so that is one condition that a woman might face or a man might face. Men do also get breast cancer. But in addition to that, what are some other things that you might have health-wise that impact you and your lifestyle, such as hypertension? One thing that we've observed in our studies, particularly here in Maryland, is that women with a breast cancer diagnosis, particularly African-American women, have high rates of hypertension. Like we observed like 50% of one of our studies where women were diagnosed with hypertension. And diabetes. So type 2 diabetes is another chronic condition that African Americans and Black people in general have high prevalence of compared to other racial and ethnic groups. And even thinking of other conditions that you might not feel are as, I won't say important, but having arthritis is also another condition that's very common among people as they age that can be debilitating sometimes. And so if you're dealing with having a breast cancer diagnosis and taking some types of medications, that can actually impact the severity of your arthritis. Some medications can do that, such as hormone related medications for estrogen receptor positive breast cancer tumors. So it's basically on top of having your one diagnosis of cancer, and you might have different cancers. It could be also having another cancer in your lifetime. Mm-hmm. But having those compounded on each other is what we call having comorbidities. And as a minority population here in the U.S., for various reasons, African Americans and Black people here have a lot of comorbidities, unfortunately. And a lot of it we think has to do with dealing with stress, compounded by dealing with racism and structural issues and lifestyle factors. And honestly, a lot of it is passed down through generations. So things that are family history related, such as cancer, but also if you have hypertension in your family or diabetes in your family, those are things that can be inherited. Risk factors for those things can also be important to think about as we age. And also for women, particularly Black women, having these comorbidities at a younger age is something that we also face more than other populations. So as we think about these as things of aging, they can also just be because of other lifestyle issues that we face that other racial ethnic groups might not have in their history. And so these things are risk factors for poor health outcomes later in life.
Awesome. And that's good to know. One of the things I had the pleasure of reading, I'm receiving your published work on a pilot study. And one of the things that caught me, I was reading the background of this pilot study, and it immediately grabbed me from this perspective. And I just want to read just a little bit of this background study. It says breast cancer research examining disparities in cancer survivorship, and we want to talk about that, and modifiable risk behaviors have been mostly cancer specific, leaving relevant gaps in disparities research relating to other cancer survivorship outcomes, including cardiovascular disease, CVD. Maintaining healthy lifestyle behaviors is a critical component of successful cancer survivorship, where unhealthy behaviors may increase the risk of reoccurrence, second primary cancers, and incidence of new comorbid conditions, including CVD or cardiovascular disease. The current study describes breast cancer survivorship factors among an online pilot study of Black breast cancer survivors in Maryland with a focus on the burden of obesity, comorbidity, and behavioral factors associated with cardiovascular risk. That hit me really hard because I am an aortic dissection survivor. And then 15 months later, I get diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer. And I've been wondering the correlation. Is there a correlation between the events or not? But I'm sure that's a question that other women have when they do have these conditions that exist. And I know cancer is not something that just jumps on you. There is something lying dormant within, but are these factors the contributors of how that cancer shows up? And so I just talked to us just a little bit about this study, because I think it's very important for women to understand the importance of studies. They're not just to collect data or to gather data. There is some outcome that you want to see from the data that you're collecting. So just talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. So disclaimer, I'm not a medical physician. So a lot of my opinions and perspectives are based off the research that I've conducted or researchers that I have followed over time who are also epidemiologists and some oncologists who I've worked with. And just to give more background on the rationale for this pilot study, we've observed in our research with women in Maryland who were diagnosed with breast cancer, a racial disparity between Black women and white women for having higher risk among Black women for cardiovascular disease mortality. This is controlling for, adjusting for, taking into account you survived your breast cancer, but then for whatever reason, you've passed away from cardiovascular disease. And a lot of the research that we have seen related to that is that there are pre-existing conditions such as yours. Say you've had a cardiovascular disease related event, say a heart attack or a stroke, or you have hypertension, or you have just heart disease in general, and then you have this diagnosis of cancer sometime later. You might not be able to take the same treatments as women who don't have those pre-existing issues with heart disease because they're worried about how strong your heart would take or be able to handle chemotherapy or radiation to the left breast if, say, that's where your cancer was found. So they have to taper your medications because they're concerned about your heart condition.
Exactly.
So that's something that we've observed. And then there's this other factor where, say, you didn't have any cardiac events or cardiovascular disease related illnesses before cancer, you have your cancer, and then sometime during treatment, you develop hypertension because of a medication, or you develop CHF, chronic heart failure or something, congestive heart failure, because of the medication's too strong and it has cardiotoxic outcomes for women sometimes. And what we're trying to decide or trying to determine is, are Black women more at risk for cardiotoxic events or cardiotoxic outcomes because of the treatments they're having? Because a lot of times Black women are diagnosed at later stages with more aggressive tumors, such as triple negative disease. And so they have to have more aggressive regimens. And so because of those regimens, they're having more cardiotoxicity, which can lead to heart issues later. And so that's what we were trying to tease apart in our data with that first study where we saw this cardiovascular disease mortality increased risk among Black women compared to white women in the state. And so our next step now is, let's see, we didn't have that other data so some background. That data was from the Maryland Tumor Registry or Cancer Registry.
Mhm.
So having cancer is a reportable disease. And so the state collects all the information about everyone's cancer diagnosis, however many you've had in life. They have, if you live in the state of Maryland or any state in the United States, actually, they record that information. They get what stage you are. They get your race, ethnicity. They get your zip code. They get everything pretty much from your medical record, except for some data that's really interesting for me. Would be like, oh, are you a smoker? Or do you have obesity? What's your BMI? What's your weight? They don't collect that information. So a lot of the clinical factors are there, but those lifestyle factors are missing. And so we wanted to get more information about the lifestyle factors among women to see if there are some more risk factors that are related to cardiovascular disease that women are dealing with, particularly Black women are dealing with during survivorship. So that was the motivation for this pilot study. And so what we've observed is, like I mentioned, 50% had hypertension. Of this pilot study, there's 100 women, and half of them have hypertension. More than half of them gain weight after their breast cancer diagnosis. So post-diagnosis weight gain is a risk factor for recurrence and having primaries of cancer and just low quality of life, just dealing with weight gain after you've had your cancer. And unfortunately, a lot of treatments do create weight gain, such as chemotherapy. And we also observed that women weren't exercising like they should. Surprisingly, we didn't observe a lot of smoking, which was good, though. That's a good fact, good factor. And in general, Black women overall, unrelated to cancer, aren't heavy smokers compared to other racial ethnic groups. But that was a good thing. We didn't observe a lot of smoking. Back to your question, could your cardiac event with your heart been related to your breast cancer diagnosis? I'm unsure. But there are other known cardiovascular disease risk factors that are related to breast cancer, such as having type 2 diabetes, because there's something there related to the inflammation caused by having diabetes, and also hormones that are not in balance when having diabetes that are related to having breast cancer, and also obesity is also related to diabetes. And we know that if you're postmenopausal, being obese is a strong risk factor for having breast cancer after menopause. So those factors are more researched, but the risk factors related to heart disease aren't as researched as much as those. But I mean, not to say that there is no correlation or association, but I think more research needs to be done to tease that apart.
Awesome. I think the other thing that when we talk about research, there is some stigma surrounding participating. I know, and I shared with you, I participated, I guess, in a survey a little while ago, but more recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I saw another survey come up and I immediately took the survey. That's me. I'm not intimidated by these surveys, but what are you finding to be barriers for participation?
How researchers frame the purpose of their research is very important. I particularly, because I am an African-American woman, and my family's been touched by cancer, I have a personal motivation for doing the research that I do. And I think that having people in research that look like your target study participants can build trust among the community, particularly among women who might feel that there's still some mistrust with working with researchers because of historically, those studies that were done, say, at Tuskegee, or even here locally in Baltimore with Henrietta Lacks, just not knowing what researchers are really doing behind the scenes. You think you're participating in something, and then it comes up to be something totally different than what you signed up for. And I think that we as a research community have to be very transparent and build the trust between the community and have that connection to show that this is our purpose and this is what we plan to do with the results. And we hope that you will be able to participate because we think that you're important. We think that you have a story to tell, and we hope that we can, in the best way we can, have more of a larger picture of what's happening. The type of research I do, I know just focus on one individual at a time. All the data is always aggregated together. So it's more like I said, on a population type level, which is good because some people are worried like, oh, they're going to figure out who I am, or, it's not anonymous and I don't want my story. So luckily, if we have large enough studies, it's very hard to decipher like who someone might be in a study. And so we make sure that we are mindful of that to protect people's identities and their data, because this is what you're giving us, something very valuable and important that you're reporting on about your health or your well-being or your living conditions and your lifestyle. And we believe that that information is very important. And so we have to make sure that you trust us with that information once you give it to us, and that we're clear on our intentions. And something I found really interesting, I was doing some research for this current grant application that I just got funded for, where I'm going to collect biospecimens. And as I've seen in the research, there's hesitancy about giving blood or giving a biological sample to researchers. So yes, I'll give you my survey data, but I don't think you should have anything beyond that, right? And so, but I read online, or not just online, but in various publications, that sometimes it's just, as researchers, we don't think to ask. We already think like we have this, oh, I don't want to ask too much of a participant. They're going to probably say no. But if a participant's actually asked, they're more willing to say, oh, yes, I just wasn't asked about it. Sure, I'll participate. So I think a lot of times, too, it's the timing of how things are asked and or how questions are asked and the approach, and making sure that people are included instead of automatically having like preconceived notions of maybe someone won't want to participate in this aspect of the study because there's some trust issue or, So I think that that's also something that we should be mindful of in the research community, especially doing minority health, because we know there are other barriers that could be at play. And then also trying to be more mindful of people are busy. And so with my studies, I was like, okay, I could do this online. You could do it from your cell phone. You don't have to come in for an interview. We don't have to schedule anything. So even with thinking about collecting biological samples, I thought of some other way to like, oh, if I mail something out to you, you can complete it and just mail it back to me. You don't have to worry about dropping it off or coming into a lab or something. So I'm trying to think of ways that are convenient for study participants, so where it doesn't take too much time away from their daily lives is also something we should consider.
Yeah, we do have one test, the older we get, that we do get, we put it in the mailbox and we get the results back. So I think most of us who've reached a certain age are pretty familiar with that line of testing, and it works out very, very well. Because if anything is wrong, they definitely call you up, and then you go through whatever process you need to do to deal with that issue. I liked the survey. When I received it, I told you I was at First Watch. I'm giving them a little plug, but I was there leaving and the survey pops up on my phone. What was very interesting was that the survey wasn't just interested in the fact that I had breast cancer, but it was interested in my lifestyle. How was I doing overall? Stress factors, my eating, exercise, all those things became very, very, very telling, even because they kind of brought back to mind, am I doing these things? How frequently am I doing these things? Have I done any of this at all? And so there is some level of real importance behind this survey. What can you say as a cancer epidemiologist, a woman in the trenches, really seeing the value in these studies? How can we get women more involved in the research?
I think that, again, the value of having diverse study participation is something that overall, just in the United States, we've been lacking. And so now is the time to show researchers that we're still here in terms of like we're still interested. It's this, how are we being approached? Why is this research important? And giving the facts. I think sometimes too, not giving that context, the background is missing. That we have made exceptional progress with breast cancer treatment and screening. We have 3D mammography now, and that technology is enhancing the cancer survivorship space, meaning like there's more survivors than ever in terms of, particularly for breast cancer. But for whatever reason, there's still this 40% gap in mortality between Black women and white women. Like, we're not making the same advances for our minority population, our African American population with breast cancer. And it's not just looking at, triple negative disease. Not every woman's going to be diagnosed with triple negative disease. That's something else we have to think about too. It is more common in Black women, but there's still more women diagnosed with estrogen receptor positive breast cancer that can be treated with certain hormone type therapies. And not all women are being diagnosed at later stage. We're noticing that people are still going for their mammograms. It's not that Black women aren't getting their mammograms. We've been getting the word out on that really, really well. Black women are getting mammograms. So it's not that they're being diagnosed later. We have noticed that they are being diagnosed younger, which is nice that they have adjusted the mammogram screening age. I just had my first mammogram. I just turned 40 this year. And now that, they feel like, oh, we should be screening sooner, especially for Black women, because we know that they're diagnosed at younger ages. So, but even if what we call like adjusting or control for these other factors, getting screened, triple negative disease, later stage, it's something going on with how we're caring for Black women after they have their disease. Is it the quality of care that they're receiving? Is it the type of chemotherapy that they're not getting that others are getting? Is it the follow-up? Say you've finished your cancer regimen and they send you out back to your primary care physician and you're not being followed, for your next screens correctly. And so a lot of my research now is focused on like this connection between you're being handed off back to your doctor. Who is your doctor? Do you have a primary care physician? Is this person really knowledgeable about what you had, these treatments you had before, and how many rounds of radiation did you have, and what things you should be on the lookout for in terms of potential side effects that are later in life? And so those conversations, I think, are important with your healthcare providers. And if we have more knowledge about what's happening through research, we can give more back to the providers and say, this isn't really a good conversation that we're having between the oncologist and the primary care physician, because there's still some information lacking on the patient doesn't know what she should be doing. Like, she should be trying to lose weight. She should be managing her comorbidities. Like you said, is she exercising enough? Like, these are factors that after having a cancer diagnosis are really important, not just in overall well-being, but just to prevent also like having a recurrence or having a second primary cancer, or like we were talking about earlier, having cardiovascular disease. So I think that having more of these diverse perspectives, it's not just having diversity in studies, but diverse perspectives, because we come from different backgrounds and different economic statuses and different educational levels and different access. Like, if we know more about the population that we're seeing these poor outcomes in, I think that we can make more educated and informed policies too, that we can translate into clinical practice.
Awesome.
So that's the importance.
Well, you heard it here. You heard it from Dr. Connor. It's more to the research than just asking you one or two questions. There's a whole lifestyle perspective that is asked in the research studies that she is doing, and I know will continue to do in the future. And Dr. Connor, I just really want to say thank you for taking on this task. The more we know, the better informed we will be, not just about breast cancer, but our overall health and how our lifestyle is a huge contributor to these health outcomes. Of course, we want to see positive health outcomes all the time, but how are we living is really, really the question. And you really bring that to the forefront in your study. How can people get information on how to access this published work?
Great question. And this publication that I shared with you is actually publicly available. Like if you go to the journal's website, which is Frontiers in Public Health, and you can type in my last name, Connor, Connor, and breast cancer, there should be 2 publications that are available. They're both free because of the type of journal they're in. So anyone can access them and download them through a PDF, or you can actually read it just straight from their website without downloading as a PDF. The first paper is just the protocol. It gives the background of how we set up the online study. We recruited through Facebook and social networks, meaning like a lot of word of mouth. Someone might have seen it on Facebook and said, oh, I see this study, you might want to participate. And they tag their friend or their loved one. We also used support groups throughout Maryland and Baltimore and various cancer centers. And so the basic background of how we recruited people is in one paper. And then the second paper is the descriptive study that you're mentioning, like talking about what lifestyle factors we found were most prevalent among the population of people who participated, and some next steps are like talked about in that paper as well, what we plan to do with the data that we collected and how it will inform a larger study. So, and if anyone ever has a question about participating in one of the studies, you are free to, if you'd like to share my email address, that's something that we can do too. And my email address is also listed on the publications. I'm the corresponding author with my address and email address for work. And just wanted to note too that everything I've discussed today is all of my personal opinion. Even though I work at Johns Hopkins, everything that I've discussed is all based on my lived experience as a researcher and my opinions and suggestions for how I see that we should be moving forward in this space of looking at breast cancer survivorship beyond, oh, you finished your treatments, what's next? Now we can talk more about what you're doing lifestyle-wise and how you can be healthier as a survivor.
Change your lifestyle, change your life with Dr. Avonne Connor. Dr. Connor, thank you so much for being our very special guest on Promising Me Unleashed. I hope that you will come back on and share more with us about your findings with the studies that you are doing, and let's figure out how we can get more people to participate in the studies. I think that's something we can work on the back end, and hopefully we can see some results from there. So thank you so much for being our guest on Promising Me Unleashed.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.